Conversations across time. 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 Conversations across time.
Good evening. I'm Mark Hoffman, retired history teacher and a proud member of the Conversations Across Time family. Tonight's panel, compiled by host Vivian Crawford and co-host Babette Joseph, includes Bass Reeves, first United States African American Deputy Marshal. Mr. Reeves was born a slave, lived with the Seminole and Cherokee Indians, apprehended almost 3,000 felons, and is said to be the inspiration for the fictional character, the Lone Ranger. John D. Rockefeller, a robber baron. Robber barons were captains of industry at the turn of the 19th century. He used unscrupulous tactics to form the Standard Oil monopoly. And J. Edgar Hoover, the founder of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Mr. Hoover was the director of the FBI through 6 presidential administrations, from Franklin Delano Roosevelt to Richard Nixon. Hoover used unscrupulous tactics and formed dossiers, especially for famous Americans like Martin Luther King and John Kennedy. Watch this exciting debate as Rockefeller is exposed for the greedy businessman he is, Hoover's hypocrisy is unmasked, and Marshal Reeves discusses Black Lives Matter.
Good evening and welcome once again to Conversations Across Time, the TV show that allows you, the viewer, to be a voyeur for conversations occurring between very unlikely participants. And first, before we begin, and I'll introduce our panel, I want to introduce you to Babette Joseph, who is the Conversations Across Time co-host. Babette, thank you once again.
Thank you.
And we had an interesting time speaking with our panelists, and so I'm going to introduce them to the audience right now and let you know, seated to my right is Bass Reeves, Federal Marshal Bass Reeves. Seated next to Marshal Reeves is Mr. John Edgar Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover. Good evening, Mr. Hoover. Thank you for coming back. No problem. I understand you're a little heated. Seated next to Mr. Hoover is Mr. John D. Rockefeller. Thank you, Mr. Rockefeller, for returning.
My pleasure.
So I want to ask you, Mr. Reeves, in that you were, first of all, the first African-American lawman. And your background is intriguing because you actually made 3,000 arrests, more than 3,000 arrests. And of those 3,000 arrests, only 14 people were killed by you. The reason that I bring that up is because in today's climate, we know and we deal with the issue of law enforcement being overzealous, particularly when it has to do with minorities. People of color are more likely to be killed by the police than our white counterparts. And so in your 3,000 arrests, how were you able to do that with only having to kill 14 people?
Well, the easiest way is to arrest them when they don't have guns on them.
Yes.
That's, you start there.
And not to assume that they have guns on
Well,
them.
I mean, they
know
probably, there's some around somewhere. You know, you got to look at who's getting arrested and why. So in the kinds of situations that I was in, you know, somebody's got a pistol somewhere or a rifle somewhere. You just figure, you know, where it's going to be and work around that.
Well, for instance, the title of this show is Charades and Masquerades. And one of the things that made you so effective, as I understand it, is that often the people that you were setting out to arrest didn't know until you got up on them that, in fact, you were there to place them under arrest.
Well, there's no way around it. Nobody is expecting to get arrested by a colored man. It's, the element of surprise I had in my favor.
And you were also ambidextrous. I mean, you were ambidextrous, so that gives you an advantage when you're going up against a gunfight, wouldn't it?
Well, it depends on how many of your hands are holding guns, I reckon. Most of the time, I found that one was enough. But again, I can't overstate the importance of avoiding guns in the first place. Because once a gunfight starts, you got a whole other set of problems you really don't want to deal with. So you start with, well, does he have one? Which most of the time, if you're going, you go looking for a man, he knows you're looking for him, he's probably got a gun.
Okay.
Right?
Okay, yes.
So you figure, well, he knows somebody's looking for him. He might not know who or even why, but if he stole something, he knows somebody might want it back, right? So you start there, he's like, I gotta avoid the gun. Then you figure, well, where is he gonna be? Can I catch him while he's asleep? He might be sleeping next to it, but if he's asleep and I can find the gun, then he's gonna have a hard time shooting me if it's not there anymore when he wakes up.
What I think is so interesting about you, Mr. Reeves, is there's so much modesty in you explaining what it is that you did. The fact that you were able to convince the people, some of the people that you were getting ready to arrest, that you couldn't read, and you'd often hand them a document and ask them to read it to you. What's interesting about that is how racism plays into that, because
they assume of course you don't know how to read.
Yeah, he's a colored man, he doesn't know how to read.
Well, I was never much of a scholar, and the characters that I dealt with, it's people think what they want to think. It's not.
Maybe they thought you weren't capable of arresting them, and maybe that's what you made work to your advantage. 3,000 is a pretty big number.
They tended to do most of their thinking at the wrong time.
And it's from the wrong end, probably, of
I would agree.
themselves, yes. Make a
You
comment.
never, in the bureau, they hog tie?
What?
Hog tie, like.
I heard the term.
I'm pretty sure you were familiar with hog tying.
Have you ever hog tied a man?
What kind of pervert do you think I am?
I don't understand your
A regular pervert, I think. The usual kind.
Hog tie. You never had to.
No.
Have you ever been hog tied?
Marshall Reeves, I think the reason that Babette and I are sitting here and chuckling somewhat is because the reference to hog tying could mean a practice that Mr. Hoover would have engaged in his private life. So I would just like to ask, since you're seated next to Mr. Hoover, and last week we had a conversation with him about his notorious practice of having his agents make arrests and then showing up for a photo op. Now, just so that you'll understand, he would have himself centered in a photograph with a criminal who had been arrested by his agents, and to make it appear as though he was in fact a part of that arrest. If you remember the lady in red, the John Dillinger arrest that was made by his agents, and he simply inserted himself and insinuated himself into that photo so that people would think that he was an excellent lawman. So I want to ask about your arrest procedures, if you would.
Well, I mean, of course, it varies, case by case. But you figure where's he going? Right. Well, if he stole something or if he's running from, like, in the Oklahoma territory, how many people went there just to escape? Some of them figured that they were safe there.
Because now, just so that our audience understands that the Oklahoma territory was the homeland of Native American tribes, and you familiarized yourself with Native Americans and spoke their language.
Well, there's a lot of languages now.
I know, but
I
you mastered enough that you could get through the Oklahoma territory and actually have Native Americans be of assistance to you.
Well, I mean, Indians ain't that different from anybody else, really. If they think you're gonna bring them a problem, they might bring you a problem. But if they don't, they don't think you're coming to, beat them over the head or anything like that. They pretty much just want to stay out of the way, really.
Well, we're talking about modesty. Babette, you and I, we spoke for a moment, and Marshall Reeves, you may not be familiar with this, but you settled, after Oklahoma became a state, you ended up moving because you could no longer be a marshal, because once Oklahoma became a state, it was subject to the Jim Crow laws, and they couldn't have a black man arresting white people. So you moved to the Detroit area. And it's very interesting because it was a TV show that I used to watch every Saturday morning. And Babette, interestingly enough, you were on radio, but you were a Lone Ranger fan.
I was a Lone Ranger fan. I listened every Friday night. It was only when I grew older that I discovered I could have listened Monday and Wednesday nights too, but I didn't know. So I listened to the Lone Ranger every Friday night on radio.
And for our audience, just so that they'll understand, and Marshall Reeves, so that we can let you know this, that there was a radio program that started in the Detroit area. And because you had lived in the Detroit area, your legend was well known throughout that area. And there was a radio show, later TV show, based upon you. But of course, the actor who portrayed you was a white man.
Yes,
but the Lone Ranger is based upon your exploits.
We think.
Who played me in the radio program?
Well, now that I don't know.
Somebody with a great voice.
But
I don't know who it was.
But the thing that is interesting about that is, of course, your whole history of being familiar with Indian, Native American customs, and so you, of course, often employed scouts that were Native American when you were tracking down criminals. So,
well, you get information from whomever. I mean, if you
did you pay for that information? Because you gave silver dollars for the information. I'm sorry.
You can't expect to make an arrest all by yourself. That's basic. I mean, if I, hog tie a man,
Mr. Hoover,
there's a process, you understand. It's not I show up and he has a rope around his ankles and wrists, or just the wrists or just the ankles, or however you prefer. I mean, I don't know how the Bureau does it.
Oh God, cut.
I don't know how they do it in the Bureau, but it's a process. So sure, you
by himself.
You gather information like anything else. You gather information. Now, one of the things that I used to do is to make it a little easier is if you get information, reliable information, you got to be willing to appeal to people's self-interest sometimes to get the kind of information you need.
So is that
now, well, is it? This depends on the people. Now, some people, if I'm going to let's say, I want to talk to a preacher.
Yes.
Right. Well, he's not going to want to talk about someone in his congregation. He doesn't know me from, you know, a tub of sealing wax, but I make it clear what the stakes are, as it were. Maybe make a contribution to the church. Now he feels a little bit more comfortable.
He's a little more invested in giving you information.
Right, or you know, you wanna ask a woman about her derelict husband. She don't know me, but you know, if she can remember why she didn't like him, that might make it a little easier. Let's say he was a unreliable source of support. If I come in and maybe offer a silver dollar or two toward the upkeep of the household or the feeding and education of the young ones, well, she might be more amenable.
Okay, so you are not familiar with the character of the Lone Ranger, but one of the things that he was portrayed as having silver bullets. And
Silver bullets?
Well, I know, but that leap was made because you were known to give out silver dollars, and they just wanted to incorporate that. Yes.
Was he hunting werewolves on the show?
No, he didn't.
He had a silver horse that was supposed
His
to...
horse was called Silver, yes.
It's
Silver.
somehow poetic.
But you rode a white
too
horse.
seriously.
You rode a white horse. You were known to always have a white horse. And the character of the Lone Ranger had a white horse, and he called the white horse Silver. But I just wondered if, when Mr. Hoover was conducting investigations, what kind of inducements he gave for information. I mean, did your agency use a similar process to get information?
No, we investigated, we tracked them down, and we arrested them. We didn't have to pay off anybody.
See, they had to show, of course, the people
They showed the badge of the Bureau.
who were the witnesses that somehow their skins would be saved if they would testify against their friends and associates. So are
you saying that in your entire bureau,
Yes.
not one time did anyone ever offer anything in exchange for information?
Absolutely not. We
Every
investigated. We got the goods on people.
Every day, all day long.
Absolutely.
And I doubt they offered many inducements. The carrot and the stick. I think it was, in his case, the stick.
A carrot stick.
That's all you need is the stick to keep people
What do you
in
do
line.
with the stick?
You
beat over their
say
heads.
to the witness.
Well, hang on a second. Now I'm
say to
confused.
the witness.
So if you beat him with the stick, what were you doing with the carrot?
Nothing. He didn't do
There was
anything
no
with
carrot.
the carrot.
Okay, well, let's move
Mr.
on.
Rockefeller is a businessman, and I'm sure as you hear the practices that first of all, you understand Marshall
But if the
Reeves.
carrot would work, he would use it, I'm sure.
I'm smiling because of several things. Number one, you moved to Detroit, right?
Wonderful town.
Right. And also was completely surrounded at that time, that era, with Indian tribes.
Yes.
Yep.
There were more Native American Indian tribes in the state of Michigan than there were in Oklahoma at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, those Native Americans had a very low tolerance for alcohol. So many of those arrests were alcohol related, okay? So the 3,000 arrests maybe have boiled down to 600 or 700 serious crimes at the time.
That's still
Now,
pretty
most of the Native
impressive.
Americans' serious crimes were stealing a horse, which in those days was a terrible crime because that was like taking a business away from
But
somebody.
Mr. Rockefeller, because of racism, the agreement, and that's why the Native Americans were so cooperated with Marshall Bass, is because that area where they lived was a sovereign area. We had criminals that would escape there because they thought no right-thinking lawman was going to come into the Native American or the so-called Indian territory to capture them. But also, Marshall Reeves was able to let the Native Americans know he wasn't there to arrest them because it was a sovereign entity and he couldn't arrest
He
them.
spoke the language and he
Yes.
was able to
Well,
build up a certain amount of trust.
Excuse me,
with
he did
Native
certain
American.
things that no one else did. Number one, he spoke the language.
Yes.
Right.
extraordinarily important.
Number two, he was underestimated because
and
of
he
his
was
race.
honest.
Yes.
That's another thing.
And people underestimated him.
Right, exactly. And
It's always good when your
the fact that he
enemies
was a person of color
underestimate you.
and went into these places,
Yes.
they gave him a little bit more respect than the fact that he felt he could go into these places.
Yes.
Not because they welcomed him, I don't think they did, but I think also the fact that he had the courage and the stupidity to go into an Indian village and lock up whoever. They did it. The Native Americans did a very poor job of policing themselves. 90%
People
of the
are not
crimes-
able to police themselves, period.
90% of the
That's
crimes.
why you need government to regulate corporations.
Well, exactly. Except in Standard Oil's case.
Except in Standard Oil's case, and the interesting thing about that is that with Standard Oil, I understand that you were talking about business practices, but we sort of glossed over last week for a moment that Standard Oil, the trains that were carrying Standard Oil's kerosene seemed to never get robbed. Now, all of the which family was it that hired the Pinkertons to protect their train shipments? But you didn't have to do
Pony
that.
Express, Wells Fargo.
But you didn't have to do that, which ties back a little bit to the explanation that perhaps you were that you had a history as a train robber yourself, and that's why your trains were never subject to being robbed.
Well, it's pretty hard to steal a pipeline, number one. Number two is that the railroads who delivered the oil and the kerosene protected themselves. It didn't have anything to do with our product. Our project was to get it to the train, okay? The trains, part of the trains deal is they were to protect that delivery, because if it didn't get delivered, they would not get paid. And that's how it worked.
Yeah,
So it boils down to very basic things.
So you're saying that the trains were not, the trains carrying Standard Oil products were never the recipient of any untoward activity, any untoward criminal activity because of the trains protecting. But I don't know, they didn't do such a good job when they were protecting your competitors' products. See, that's
they
what,
didn't give us a job in what?
when they were protecting your competitors' products.
That's not true. That doesn't happen to be true.
Oh, but it
Where
actually.
they didn't do a good job is policing the pricing. That's
But,
where they didn't do
but
the job,
standard, but
in all honesty.
a train carrying products for
A
Standard
train
Oil.
robbery is a train robbery.
But your products were never the subject of a train robbery.
Absolutely not. And I will tell you that there isn't a business today
Yes.
that has more than 3 places of business that doesn't ask for a better price.
We're not
anywhere
talking about-
than anyone they do business with.
We're
Of
not
course
talking
they
about
are.
Not a
asking
single
for a better
business.
price.
And it goes on with Standard Oil today.
Consumers are represented by the government. If anybody's going to help them,
Well,
it's
they
going
do
to
a
be the
lousy
government.
job.
But
I
small
fear you're
business
right.
owners, business owners. When we were talking about Walmart last week, and we were talking about the fact that Walmart's practices have driven the mom and pop retailers out of business. There's absolutely no question about that. Now, I understand that Mr. Hoover would argue that, well, you're building the country, but one of the things that we see happening today is that those small operations, those small businesses cannot survive in a climate when they have a Walmart, when you come into an area and that sucks up all the oxygen from the other retailers. I wanted to go back to you, Marshall Reeves, just because I don't know if you're familiar with the movement called Black Lives Matter.
A communist movement, might I add.
Well, of course, you would
Everything's
see
a
it that way.
communist movement,
But
according
in
to you.
today's climate, what has happened is that the way that you were able to arrest people that we spoke of earlier, where you only killed 14, and you made 3,000 arrests.
It's a pretty big number when you think about it.
That's
14.
yeah, 14.
But it's better than 15.
But here's the point: 14 killings, making 3,000 arrests. Today we have police officers who have, and it's been a terrible problem in this country, that there's a whole movement now to support the fact that law enforcement treats people of color in a different manner than they do our white counterparts. And it's called Black Lives Matter. So I'm not sure that you're familiar with that movement, but Black Lives Matter is actually a movement started by young people, I would say, who actually decided to put it out there to let the public know, and it happened as a result of an unfortunate killing and a couple years ago. And so the movement has taken life because people are recognizing that Black Lives Matter and the way that you affect arrests matter. Now, you, of course, with your record of 3,000 arrests and only 14 killings, that's something that we'd like you just to address in terms of what's going on in today's climate.
Well, I mean, you got to look at, you know, what justice is, right? So, you want to bring people to justice, they get their day in court. It's in the Constitution. So, I just focus on making sure that they get in front of a judge and jury to answer to them. You know, I don't have any intention of replacing the Grim Reaper. It's not what I signed on for.
Well, you hit upon something. You want to make sure that they get in front of a court, a judge to answer for their crimes. See, the premise of Black Lives Matter is that the police officers that being overly zealous are in fact killing people even when they're stopped for questioning, that the person never gets before a trial of fact to even plead to any charges. They take the law into their own hands, just like the FBI did under Mr. Hoover's direction.
Sometimes you got to do that.
So you admit it.
Like it's a bad thing.
It's a terrible thing.
How so? Justice? So you need to,
Justice is
some
not-
people just need a whack on the head to straighten out.
It's
Okay?
not for you to figure out.
I am the chief law enforcement officer of the United States, and I know what's necessary to enforce the law. And if you got to crack someone's head open, good.
Well,
Mr.
how many
Reeves
times
is
did
right.
you have to get hit on the head before you turned straight?
I don't have to,
Turned
I don't have to
straight,
answer
right.
that question.
He was
On the
never
straight and narrow, he was talking about the straight
I was
and narrow.
I was brought up straight and narrow. I didn't need that.
Once again, this half an hour has gone very quickly, and we still did not get into some other areas with your friend, Mr. Rockefeller, your lunch buddy. But we will invite you back again, and then maybe we can pick up where we left off. But
Maybe I don't want to come back. Waste my time with this crap.
well.
Conversations across time. Conversations.
Hope you enjoyed the show.
across time.
The issues raised in this show are current today. The unscrupulous tactics of business, as illustrated by John D. Rockefeller, and the abuse of power by business. The illegal surveillance of American citizens, as illustrated by J. Edgar Hoover. Today we have the greed of Wall Street and the illegal surveillance under the Patriot Act. They both harken back to the days of John D. Rockefeller and J. Edgar Hoover.
Conversations across time. 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 Conversations across time.